Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, April 26th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today, we have the latest from former President Donald Trump's legal schedule, plus protests continue on college campuses over the war in Gaza, and can President Joe Biden win back young, progressive voters? It's been another busy week of legal dramas for former President Donald Trump. To help us reset the stage on where things stand, I caught up with USA Today Justice Department correspondent Bart Jansen. Bart, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
So Bart, let's start by getting into the latest from Donald Trump's immunity case at the Supreme Court. Remind us what's at issue here and what stood out to you from oral arguments yesterday.
This is the case in Washington, D.C., where he faces obstruction and conspiracy charges over events basically leading up to the Capitol attack on January 6th and his efforts to allegedly steal the 2020 election. The federal judge in that case was aiming to start the trial in March, but Trump argued that as a former president, he should be immune from all the federal charges. So the district court judge told him, no, he can be tried. The D.C. Circuit Court said that he could be tried as a former president, that there was no immunity once he had left office. And so the Supreme Court had arguments on Thursday, basically to find for the first time whether there should be immunity to former presidents after they leave office. Trump's lawyer, John Sauer, argues for basically absolute immunity, that anything a president was doing in office was protected from criminal charges, because otherwise, after a president left office, particularly if they had done something controversial, some of the arguments that were brought up as the justices questioned him included, say, the Bay of Pigs invasion against Cuba, or the prospect of a president ordering a military coup against another country, or potentially even ordering his own military to kill a potential rival. Those examples, while sounding harsh, basically fall under official actions. And the question is, should he be immune from criminal charges? Otherwise, he spends his whole administration looking over his shoulder, wondering whether he could be charged. So the government and several of the justices who were appointed by Democratic presidents said, yes, it's a good idea that presidents should be looking over their shoulder about the actions that they take in office. But Mr. Sauer and several of the conservative justices worried that if a president was concerned about facing potential trial for any contentious decisions that he made, that it would deeply weaken the presidency and make a president fearful of being charged after leaving office.
And Bart, these arguments went on while Trump's hush money trial continued. I know we're into witness testimony at this point. What's the latest there, and who have we heard from on the stand?
David Pecker, the former chief executive for American Media Incorporated, which is the parent company of the National Enquirer. Now, Pecker has already testified that the publication made payments to people to stop derogatory stories about Trump as he campaigned for president in 2016. One was $30,000 to a doorman at Trump Tower who was trying to sell a story about Trump having an illegitimate child. Pecker said even though his reporters proved that it was an untrue allegation, that they paid the money anyway to basically take the potential story out of circulation. What he was talking about on Thursday was Karen McDougal, a former Playboy model who also claimed an affair with Trump for about a year during the 2006 timeframe, was paid $150,000 for her life story, and then the National Enquirer did not write that story. And Pecker described telling Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, that he thought the story could be very provocative and that they should try to block its publication. And so that sort of lays the groundwork for Michael Cohen's testimony, which is expected later in the trial.
And finally, Bart, we've learned that Trump will not get a new trial in his case against E. Jean Carroll. What happened with this ruling yesterday?
Well, this was just a ruling from the district court judge, Lewis Kaplan, who oversaw the case where E. Jean Carroll, a columnist in New York City, had claimed that Trump sexually assaulted her decades ago in a department store. After she made those claims, Trump denied those charges, and the way that he did allowed her to sue him for defamation. She won the defamation case. Trump was ordered to pay $83 million in damages. And so he asked the judge, Lewis Kaplan, to review that verdict with the eye toward overturning it. And Kaplan said that he did not need to overturn it, that he considered it a correct judgment. He said Trump's malicious and unceasing attacks on Carroll were disseminated to more than 100 million people, which included public threats and personal attacks. So Kaplan is letting the judgment against Trump stand. Trump has continued to say he will appeal to continue to try to get that verdict overturned.
All right, never-ending stories in Trump land. Bart Jansen covers the Justice Department for USA Today. Thank you, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
Protesters at Columbia University faced a deadline yesterday to dismantle their encampment as protests and arrests intensify across the nation. Columbia has served as an epicenter of growing student dissent against the war in Gaza. The school's president, Manoush Shafiq, warns students that if the tents are not moved by today, quote, we will have to consider options for restoring calm to campus, unquote. In an update late yesterday, the university said talks between student protesters and the school have shown progress and are continuing. Demonstrators across the nation are protesting the civilian toll in Gaza, where an Israeli invasion has killed more than 34,000 people following a Hamas-led attack in Israel that killed almost 1,200 people. Students oppose U.S. military aid to Israel and want their schools to stop investing endowment money in companies with Israeli links. A New York appeals court has overturned Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction after finding that the judge for the trial handed down improper rulings. The New York appeals court said in a written opinion yesterday that the judge in Weinstein's case admitted testimony from women with allegations that were not a part of the case. That case helped spur the Me Too movement and was part of a wave of allegations against Weinstein. In yesterday's decision, the New York court ordered a new trial, and he'll continue serving a 16-year prison sentence stemming from a 2022 California conviction for rape. Bombshell reports in 2017 detailed allegations from dozens of women of rape and sexual assault at the hands of Weinstein, prompting others to break their silence with allegations against similarly powerful men and igniting the Me Too movement. Weinstein has repeatedly maintained his innocence and denied all allegations of non-consensual sex. Weinstein's lawyers hailed yesterday's decision, while others condemned the ruling as legal maneuvering that will make it harder for victims of sexual assaults. President Joe Biden is losing some young progressive voters. Can lawmakers from the Democratic Party's left flank help win them back? I spoke with USA Today Congress and campaigns reporter Ken Tran for more. Hello, Ken.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for hopping on. So let's start with this. Where does President Joe Biden's support among younger voters stand right now? What's the polling tell us?
Sure. So we're seeing that President Joe Biden still enjoys an advantage over his counterpart, former President Donald Trump, with young voters. Generally, the pattern with young voters and Democrats. But we have seen that young voters seem to be falling off with the president. The advantage that Joe Biden has against Donald Trump isn't as potent this year as it was in 2020. At least that's what it appears so far right now. So one Harvard Youth poll shows that Biden's leading Trump 50% to 37% among registered young voters. Those are voters aged 18 to 29. And he's also leading 56% to 37% among likely young voters. So that's still a pretty significant advantage over the former president. But compared to Biden's victory in 2020, we saw that around 60% of likely young voters supported Biden compared to Trump's 30%. So that advantage that Biden has is definitely lower than it was compared to the last election.
Yeah, so why is Biden now relatively struggling with many young progressive voters?
So we're seeing that mainly because of the administration's response and the U.S. response to the Israel-Hamas war and the war in Gaza and how Israel has conducted it, especially with regards to the civilian death toll in Gaza and how Israel has really just sort of approached its invasion of Gaza.
I'm curious what we're hearing, Ken, from progressive lawmakers. What approach do they want to see from the president? And Are they trying to convince progressive voters to give Biden their vote?
So it's a difficult balancing act for these progressives, right? These progressive lawmakers do support President Joe Biden's reelection campaign. There are a lot of domestic progressive wins that they can champion on the campaign trail. Like a lot of the legislative victories, such as the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, the Chips and Science Act, they can brag about these on the campaign trail. But for a lot of these young progressive voters that are really worried about how the Israel-Hamas war is going, it can be difficult to convince them to turn out. So what progressive lawmakers are trying to do is trying to get the White House to maybe shift a little bit to give them some more room or deliverables to be able to tell young voters to turn out and vote for the president's reelection campaign.
And Ken, what do we hear from the Biden campaign when it comes to their relative struggles with this group of voters?
The Biden campaign is still drawing a significant contrast with former President Donald Trump. That the Biden campaign is still focusing on other issues very important to young voters, such as climate change, healthcare, and immigration. Those are things that progressive lawmakers are also championing on the campaign trail. It's just that so far, this issue is really hard for the campaign to balance, while other progressive lawmakers say that, for example, the White House needs to make a stronger push for a ceasefire.
All right, Ken Tran covers Congress and campaigns for USA Today. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
The first round of the NFL draft is in the books, and not surprisingly, the Chicago Bears selected quarterback Caleb Williams from the University of Southern California with the first pick. In fact, it was the night of the quarterback early on, with 5 of the first 10 picks used on the position. One of them was maybe the night's biggest shock when the Atlanta Falcons selected Washington's Michael Penix Jr. with the 8th pick. They already signed veteran quarterback Kirk Cousins to a $180 million contract this offseason and were not expected to pick a QB. The draft continues tonight with rounds 2 and 3. You can follow along with USA Today Sports. And today is Arbor Day, when folks are encouraged to plant trees. According to the Arbor Day Foundation, climate change is the biggest challenge that faces the planet, but more trees can pull greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And according to the EPA, planting trees and vegetation can cool areas down. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Bradley Glansrock, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.